accommodate Councillor Fletcher, who has to leave shortly,
Second.
and that will be that item 18, the Statement of Proposal Draft Air Quality Bylaw for Indoor Domestic Fires, recommendations from the Regulatory Committee, be accorded precedence at this time. If everybody's in favour of that, I presume there's no problem with that. So if we proceed to item number 18, and if I could ask Michael Sinclair, Manager of Social Policy and Bylaws, and Belinda Hanson, the team leader for Policies and Bylaws, to come to the table. And I looked at this paper and I thought, we're not revisiting 2014, are we? And I'm assured that we are not, but that this is about implementing simply the regional council bylaws to fill a gap that exists, but I'll let officials speak to the paper. And the first call I'll give to Councillor Fletcher.
Mr. Chairman, I think it would
Sorry, no, can we hear from the officials first, Chrissy? And after we've heard from you, I'll move pro forma the recommendations.
Thank you, Your Worship, and kia ora everybody. Thank you for this opportunity to speak to this item. I'd like to introduce Catherine Temple. Catherine Temple is the principal advisor that has actually been leading the development of this bylaw, and she is with me to support me in answering any of the more technical questions that you may have in response to this item. As has already been referred to, this is not a rehash of the bylaw that was previously presented to Council in 2014. The purpose of this bylaw is to cover a regulatory gap that has been formed as a result of the introduction of the unitary plan. So the previous regional air, land and water plan, which had some provisions in it which governed the use of indoor fires, was basically ceased once the unitary plan came into effect, and this bylaw is picking up the provisions and regulations that were previously contained within that air, land and water plan. There's three components to this. The first is to place some restrictions on the burning of certain products within your fireplaces, such as high sulphur coal, tannalised timber, and wet timber that produces high levels of smoke. The second is a general provision that says that you should not burn any products or burn products in your fireplace in a way that actually causes nuisance to your next door neighbours. The third is one that extends provisions relating to the installation of new fireplaces into urban areas on properties that are greater than 2 hectares in size. The reason for that is that there is already national standards on which place restrictions on the types of fireplaces that can be installed on properties of less than 2 hectares in size, regardless of whether they are urban or rural. But the previous air, land and water plan included restrictions on the larger properties in urban environments as well. And you will notice in the report that we have also, as part of that particular provision, also sought to redefine the urban areas that were previously included in the air, land water plan, so that it is more reflective of our current urban environment and is also future-proofed for future changes to urban form across the Auckland region. I'm happy to take any questions that you may have on that.
Thank you. Just before we go to questions, and the first section will be about questions, I'll move the recommendations A and B.
As the chairman of the committee, thank you. That's bringing it to you, Mr.
Seconded
Chairman.
by Linda Cooper. Questions, starting Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, I support this if it is exclusively around rules that regulate the installation of the fireplace, rules to prevent nuisance of neighbouring properties, and the prohibition of burning of certain materials, particularly damp wood. My difficulty is in reading this quite closely that looking at the draft here, it does leave scope for perhaps some forms of other interpretation, and I want to see a belts and braces. This has been a controversial proposal in the past. I want to see that we lock it down, we all know exactly what we're doing, and that there is no scope for any deviation from what is the intention of what I believe is the majority of councillors sitting around. So I want, in terms of my question, I want to know why we needed, you know, sort of 35 odd pages for this proposed bylaw when we could have probably put it on one page?
That appears to be the question. I think what the council is actually wanting is reassurance that it does just what you said and doesn't allow for movement beyond that.
Yes, perhaps I'm feeling a little cynical today, but I just want, brevity is better when you are trying to be very specific.
We appreciate the need for brevity, both in terms of accessibility to the public and also in terms of trying to keep things as simple as we can. I can assure you that there was no intention that we would be extending the boundary beyond what we have stated in the introduction. The issue was more complicated by the fact that we were seeking to redefine the urban area, and that in order to do any sort of public consultation, we need to be able to demonstrate all of the options that we've explored and why we have actually chosen the option that is the recommended option in the statement of proposal. So the document is made significantly longer because there is significant level of detail around the options that we've explored on the redefinition of the urban environment.
Thank you. Councillor Hills.
Through Mayor, I was just...
Question.
It was just a thing about that I'm not actually on the committee, but it's in the agenda. The chair of the committee, Linda Cooper's taken me off.
No, I didn't.
Hearings.
That just sounds bad, Richard. It wasn't taking you off. You weren't available.
Yeah,
Sorry.
but
Yeah.
it's in the... Just a clarification.
Okay.
Coming off the bench.
He's very naughty.
Can I move on from that, Councillor Newman?
Impact player.
Thank you, Michael and Catherine. I asked the question at the Regulatory Committee, but I think it's a fair question to restate here for the balance of the membership of the governing body. I asked the question at the Regulatory Committee of how many breaches of the Land and Water Plan had resulted in prosecutions in relation to the use or misuse of domestic wood burners. And the answer, I think, was 0.
Councillor, through the chair, yes, that's right, Councillor Newman. The number of prosecutions in the last few years that I was assured was actually 0, as it's turned out. There were several complaints. There are about 200 complaints a year in the council area about the local pollution public nuisance issue. When I talked to the enforcement guys about this, Mr. Jared Osman, who works in one of the consent monitoring areas, the air quality monitoring and complaints area, he said that there were a couple of issues that were taken, were needed to be, where prosecution was considered. Those were taken to the council, the obviously previous councils, and the decision was not to prosecute, but to increase the level of intervention, education, and liaison with the households concerned. So there were a couple where a prosecution was considered, but they didn't proceed on the basis of feedback from the council. So I'm sorry, I can't tell you exactly when that was, but someone could provide that information.
That's helpful because it goes to the point about the continuum of interventions in favour of education. Okay, the other thing that I wanted to ask, and a point that I didn't really explore in too much detail at the Regulatory Committee, but the statement of proposal makes a statement, without effective regulation, Auckland's air quality is more likely to deteriorate. So, but looking at the background report and the statement of proposal really doesn't give much metrics around the air quality in Auckland, does it? It's a statement, but it's a statement with not a lot of science around it.
Well, there is quite a bit of science, but you're right that we didn't put all that detail in the statement proposal. The air quality of Auckland, of Auckland's urban area, has been tracked really carefully over the last, for many years. It is actually increasing gradually all the time, in spite of the growth in the city. But one of the reasons for that, and the surveys of the domestic home heating surveys and all that the council has carried out, including the current council, shows that every year as people replace or put in, replace an old fireplace or put one in, they're having to meet better standards, higher standards for their domestic heating,
Yep.
for their wood burners, for argument's sake. That is actually driving improvements in the city's air quality, along with the same trend in vehicle technology, which is happening because of, in that instance, the second case, improvements in vehicle technology and the emissions from fuels for traffic, transport fuels. So both of those are generating improvements, which is why we feel that the bylaw itself, the draft bylaw, is important, because not only does it manage the nuisance effects, it's ensuring that as new or replacement appliances go in, they are meeting a standard, and the old ones are falling out and being replaced. That is the driver for change in the city, which is why we feel we need to
Can
continue
I
it.
ask one follow-up question, Mr Chair? I do reserve the right to speak, but doesn't that argument, though, lead to the conclusion that actually the national wood burner standards, which are also set out in the draft statement of proposal, are working? And those standards are national standards, and if they are working, because as we're migrating to upgrading the domestic wood burners, we're already getting the benefit of a regulatory device that already applies.
That is correct. The national standards do not address the types of products that are actually being used in the fireplace, which is why we are keen to ensure that those rules are carried over into our urban environment use. The other aspect of this is that as we continue to grow as a city, a lot of those areas that are deemed to become urban in the future, or are recent urban but still have large land blocks on them, are the properties where which are not currently covered by the national standards. But as those lots continue to be reduced in size, and those new urban areas become more urbanised, if you like, then those properties that are currently being built on properties of 2 hectares or more may in the future actually be the properties that are in very tight and close proximity to other properties. So we have opportunities now to begin to actually address some of those and future-proof the air quality of Auckland through this bylaw.
Mr Chair, is there an opportunity? Mr Chair, one follow-up, sorry. Is there an opportunity then, if that is the case, to address what appears to be a deficiency with quite a good national wood burner standard to ensure that it covers all property types, and the benefit wouldn't just be for Auckland, it would be for all urban communities applying that standard?
Through the Chair, if I could just clarify your understanding, are you suggesting that we should be lobbying central government for changes to the national standard?
That's one possibility. If the standard is good but applies to a certain scale of property, and that needs to change to reflect a wider scope of properties to be included by that standard, and that there are benefits that could apply elsewhere outside of Auckland as well as in Auckland, that would seem to be a good point of advocacy, Your Worship.
So through the Chair, alongside this work, our unit is also doing work around the other actions that Council can actually take. If there was an appetite from Council for us to take a greater advocacy role as part of the review of the national standards, which is actually occurring at the moment, we would be happy to take that advice as well.
Reserve the right to speak.
Thank you. Councillor Clow, would you want me to come back to you, Councillor?
No. In the actual bylaw, so on page 205, so it gives the definition of an indoor open fire, but then there's really no reference to it. And sorry, I didn't read the whole 45 pages, but I take from this that actually indoor open fires therefore are going to be left untouched, and I endorse that, by the way. And so over a time with natural attrition and people go for building consents and want to do something with their, change their indoor open fire and want to put in an indoor domestic fire, they won't get a building consent unless they have committed to the indoor domestic fire to replace the indoor open fire. Is that true? This is a subtle, we're talking about open fires, old-fashioned fireplaces, and that's where we had the fight. A lot of people coming back saying this is over the top. It's going to happen through attrition as people renovate their buildings. And from memory, isn't it on the title that when a house is sold, they have to undertake to replace those fireplaces?
Through the chair, I'd just like to clarify that you're right, councillor, that the draft bylaw as proposed does not actually retrospectively fit standards to existing indoor fires. They still have to meet the general emission standards that are in clause 6, which is Michael's just outlined, which are about not causing a nuisance, not burning the wrong things.
Yeah.
When let's say I had an open fire in my property and I came to renovate or replace that for whatever reason, it would have to meet the standards set out in either the wood burner standards, the national wood burner standards if I'm putting in a wood burner, or the regional standards if I'm putting in something else such as a pellet burner or whatever. So yeah, that's when it kicks in, when those open fires are replaced or upgraded. In the meantime, people have to use them in a way that minimises smoke for other people